The charges are grave. Why release you? I am innocent. You must believe me. Your trial awaits at dawn. You can't keep me here forever. Your defiance changes nothing. He is right. I demand justice!
For centuries, we have imagined prisons as iron bars, courtrooms, and long sentences handed down in orderly halls of justice. But in reality, 3,000 years ago, there were no metal bars, no constitutional rights, no appeals, only darkness, stone, chains. What did it mean to be imprisoned in the ancient world? What did you see, what did you smell, what did you hear, when the door closed behind you? And why did imprisonment often feel worse than death? Today, we step into the prisons of ancient Israel, Egypt, and Babylon, not as distant observers, but as witnesses. Stay until the end, to discover why imprisonment in the ancient world was often not a sentence, but a slow descent into survival. 3,000 years ago, the world of the Bible stretched across rugged hills and fortified cities in ancient Israel, the fertile mud brick compounds along the Nile in Egypt, and the towering stone architecture of Babylon in Mesopotamia. In Israel, cities like Jerusalem were built with thick limestone walls. Beneath them lay storage chambers, cisterns, and carved rock vaults, spaces that could easily become holding cells. In Egypt, state compounds of sun-dried brick stood beneath the blazing desert sun. Within their courtyards and administrative complexes were guarded enclosures for detainees. In Babylon, under kings like Nebuchadnezzar II, conquered peoples were deported, confined, and absorbed into imperial systems of labor and control. Justice in this world was swift. The law of Moses prescribed restitution, corporal punishment, or death, for many offenses. Long-term imprisonment was rare. Prisons were usually temporary holding places, before execution, enslavement, interrogation, or forced labor. This is critical to understand. Ancient prisons were not designed for rehabilitation. They were designed for containment, humiliation, and deterrence. When Joseph was confined in Egypt in Genesis 39, Scripture says he was placed in the house of the captain of the guard, likely a royal detention facility attached to Pharaoh's security complex. When Jeremiah was lowered into a muddy cistern in Jeremiah 38, it was not a courtroom sentence, it was a silencing tactic. And when Samson was blinded and forced to grind grain in Judges 16, imprisonment became public humiliation. These were not cells with bars. They were chambers of suffering. Imagine descending narrow stone steps, beneath a fortified gate. The air grows cooler and heavier. Torchlight flickers against damp limestone. Shadows dance along uneven walls. The chamber smells of sweat and mildew. There are no windows. Instead of iron bars, there are heavy wooden doors reinforced with bronze. Rings are hammered into stone walls. Rope bindings, or iron shackles, secure wrists and ankles. Some prisons were abandoned cisterns, deep bottle-shaped pits carved into bedrock. Once they stored rainwater. Now they held human bodies. Picture the moment Jeremiah was lowered by ropes into such a pit. Scripture tells us there was no water, only mud. And he sank. How long could a man survive like that? The textures were brutal. Rough limestone scraping skin, splintered beams biting into shoulders, rusted metal cutting flesh. The colors were muted, dark browns, soot black, faded sandstone illuminated by a trembling orange flame. The sounds. Chains scraping rock. Footsteps echoing above. Water dripping in hollow rhythm. Rats rustling in darkness. And the smell. Mold. Sweat. Burning oil. Human waste left on dirt floors, with no drainage, no sanitation, no relief. Unlike modern prisons with electric lights and plumbing, ancient confinement meant darkness and decay. This was not a place of reform. It was a place of survival. Prisons were built from available materials. In Israel, carved stone chambers and repurposed storage vaults. In Egypt, mud brick enclosures within administrative compounds. In Mesopotamia, stone vaults, or underground pits. Restraints included braided rope bindings, wooden stocks locking ankles and wrists, bronze or early iron shackles forged by blacksmiths, iron rings fixed into walls. In Egypt, during eras associated with rulers such as Ramses II, prisoners were often integrated into state labor forces, constructing monuments, shaping stone, hauling materials beneath the sun. Imprisonment was rarely idle. It was productive, for the state. Morning did not begin with sunlight, because many prisoners never saw it. Food was rationed, coarse bread. Water. Sometimes lentils. Nothing more. There were no beds. Prisoners slept chained, seated upright, or collapsed on dirt floors. Skin festered under metal cuffs. Infection spread easily. Dehydration was constant. Parasites flourished. Labor filled the hours. Grinding grain was common, pushing heavy circular millstones. The grinding sound echoed endlessly. Imagine Samson, blinded, pushing a millstone like livestock, his humiliation visible to all. Other prisoners quarried rock, molded bricks, or carried loads under guard. Fatigue was relentless. This was not a place of reform. It was a place of survival. In ancient Near Eastern societies, honor defined identity. Imprisonment stripped it away. Families carried disgrace. Social standing vanished. A man behind stone walls was a man dishonored. Yet something extraordinary happened in these spaces. Faith deepened. Genesis tells us that Joseph interpreted dreams while imprisoned. Confinement became preparation. Jeremiah continued to proclaim God's message, even from a courtyard under guard. Some captives in Babylon prayed facing Jerusalem, even while displaced and confined. Chains bound wrists, but they could not bind faith. Imprisonment became a crucible, refining trust in God, under pressure. And that spiritual dimension is impossible to ignore. Not all prisoners were common criminals. Political detainees were often held temporarily, to silence dissent. War captives were paraded publicly, before confinement. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, entire populations were deported from conquered territories, including Judeans taken into exile. Royal prisoners might receive slightly better treatment, but confinement was still harsh. Public humiliation amplified punishment. Sometimes, the spectacle was the sentence. Centuries later, when Jesus said in Matthew 25, "I was in prison, and you visited me," his audience did not imagine fluorescent-lit hallways. They imagined suffocating darkness. To visit a prisoner meant entering a space of stench and decay. Compassion required courage. Deliverance was not poetic language, it was survival language. In a world where physical freedom was fragile, spiritual freedom carried explosive meaning. The promise of release, of chains broken, resonated deeply. Because everyone understood captivity. Pause. Picture rough stone beneath your hands. Feel the bite of iron around your ankles. Hear the drip of water echoing, in endless darkness. Smell mold, and stale air. How long could you survive, in total darkness? A day. A week. This was not a place of reform. It was a place of survival. In later centuries under Roman rule, prisons would evolve, more structured, sometimes with barred cells. But even then, confinement remained brutal. We will explore that, in a future episode. For now, remember this. 3,000 years ago, imprisonment was not measured in years served. It was measured in endurance. And sometimes, in faith. Ancient prisons were not institutions of rehabilitation. They were chambers of suffering, damp, dark, and degrading. They reflected a world where justice was swift, mercy was scarce, and honor could vanish overnight. Yet even in those depths, God worked. Joseph rose from confinement to leadership. Jeremiah's words outlived his chains. Samson's humiliation became the stage for divine judgment. True chains are not always made of iron. Understanding ancient imprisonment helps us grasp the emotional power of biblical promises, freedom, redemption, deliverance. If this opened your eyes to the realities of life 3,000 years ago, like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Which part of ancient daily life would you like to explore next? Homes. Warfare. Markets. Justice under Rome. Because sometimes, to understand Scripture more deeply, we must first step into the darkness it was written in. And only then do we fully appreciate the light.